Hey guys, Steinixos here. So today we'll be going over Luffy's full journey to Emperor status to figure out how strong a Wano Gear 5 Luffy is. Now note, I have touched upon some parts of Luffy's journey before in other videos, but those were really just primers to introduce a more nuanced view of Luffy into the discussion space. However, in this video, I'll refine all the concepts I had already introduced to paint a much more clear and accurate picture of Luffy's strength. And of course, in this video, I will be quantifying Luffy's strength in numbers, but make no mistake, the most important thing you should take from this video is the hierarchical understanding of Luffy's powers and progression throughout the story. You cannot understand a Gear 5 Luffy's strength by looking at any single feat. There's a rich history that informs how strong Luffy is as a character that must be taken into account. And note, though I'll try to go over as much as possible, I obviously cannot go through every single thing and every single concern. So with that understood, let's get into it. Now, just as a gentle reminder, I think we should quickly go over the difference between attack potency versus destructive capacity. Now, destructive capacity typically describes the scale of an attack, like how big of an area can this attack damage. So for example, here we have the buggy bomb, which is a cannonball explosive that can destroy multiple buildings with ease. And buggy specifically tells us that it can destroy an entire small village, which for now we'll use as synonymous as a small town, in one shot. So assuming a standard small town size, we would say a buggy bomb has a small town level destructive capacity because it can literally destroy a small town in one shot. And note carefully, the in one shot part is very important because obviously less powerful explosives could also destroy a small town if you use multiple of them, but that would be the combined destructive capacity of all the explosive used, not the destructive capacity of any single explosive. Now, attack potency on the other hand speaks to the effectiveness of an attack. How it relates to destructive capacity is that the attack potency of an attack would be the destructive capacity that the attack is equivalent to. So for example, here we have Luffy casually kicking Buggy and clearly hurting him. Now we know that Buggy is durable enough to take a buggy bomb head on without any damage whatsoever. So even though this kick from Luffy wouldn't have a literal small town area of effect of a buggy bomb, we know that it is still at least as strong as the buggy bomb, being that it is able to hurt Buggy, who can tank a buggy bomb with no damage. So we would say that Luffy's kick has an at least small town level attack potency. So an attack doesn't literally need to destroy a specific large area for us to say that it has a specific attack potency. And an attack with a much smaller area of effect can be much stronger than an attack with a much larger area of effect. And just to hammer this point in even further, because even after what I thought to be a very clear explanation, I still get comments like these saying that King Kong Gun, for example, can't have a country level attack potency because the aftermath of the attack did not physically destroy the entire island of Dressrosa. So to address this, let us take a look at Kaido for example. So we know that all of Kaido's attacks are stronger than a Dressrosa Luffy's King Kong Gun. And yet even so, here you can clearly see that the aftermath of Ragnarok from a hybrid form Kaido has a much smaller area of effect than a Dressrosa Luffy's King Kong Gun. As a matter of fact, the area of effect of Ragnarok is even smaller than the area of effect of Dressrosa Dawn size Jewel Dragon Nail. But again, we obviously know that it is not weaker than these attacks. And it is also obviously silly to say that just because Kaido's Ragnarok only had the small area of effect of cratering a few meters of ground, that it therefore cannot be above building level or city block level in strength. If every time someone with an attack potency of planet level or above punched someone in the ground, it literally needed to destroy the planet or even a continent, then most of high level fiction just could not happen. Furthermore, as explained by Bon Clay in the series itself, truly high level attacks which focus and concentrate power does not cause any unnecessary destruction. So a very powerful kick from him, for example, could result in a perfectly symmetric hole without any cracks or other such unnecessary destruction of the greater structure of the building. And even Haki, which is an additional power in the One Piece world that can be superimposed onto regular attacks, As Hyogoro clearly explained, Haki allows such focus and control that it can make a user's blade casually cut through steel, but if the user does not want it to cut something, they can choose for this same blade to not be able to even cut a sheet of paper. So Haki users are typically about focus and controlling how much and what they destroy, thus you generally won't see large scale destruction. So again, an attack doesn't literally need to destroy a specific large area for us to say that it has a specific attack potency, and an attack with a much smaller area of effect can be much stronger than an attack with a much larger area of effect. Now, in the outskirts of the Goa Kingdom exists the forest of Mount Kalbo that is filled with many large creatures and many treacherous paths. But this is where a young Luffy at the age of 7 years old lived and trained for 10 years until he finally set sail at the age of 17. Now during this 10-year training period, we see where a young Luffy along with Ace and Sabo, as well as just Ace when Sabo was thought to have died, were able to take down these forest animals. And again, as young children, Luffy, Ace and Sabo, as well as just with Ace, were shown to fight competently even against regular adult men with weapons. And then remember, throughout his childhood period, Luffy was also receiving training from his Navy Vice Admiral grandfather Garp. And this was not some lukewarm training, it was literally life or death situations. We see where Garp described this training, and it included things like throwing Luffy off a bottomless cliff, or leaving Luffy to survive in the jungle by himself at night, or tying Luffy to a balloon and then send him flying in the sky. So with a childhood like this, it shouldn't be surprising to you that a beginning of series Luffy was one-shotting a Sea King at his village and easily biting a knife into and casually destroying a building with a missed attack. But exactly how powerful was this beginning of series Luffy? Well, as already described in the attack potency section, in chapter 10 of One Piece we were introduced to the Buggy Bomb, a cannonball explosive that was demonstrated to be easily able to destroy a large portion of the town they were in. Buggy himself even described the Buggy Bomb as having enough power to destroy a smaller town in one shot. So evidently, we can be sure that the Battle Wiki pixel scale calculation, which puts it at 66 tons or city block level, is likely an underestimation. But let us work with this value as our base. Now right after this demonstration, we saw where Buggy was tanking the same Buggy Bomb with virtually no damage whatsoever. Only his clothes were slightly scorched, and even an injured Zoro, who was sleeping inside of a house to recover, had the house he was resting in blasted with a Buggy Bomb, and he emerged completely unharmed. So literally from the earliest chapters of One Piece, it was established that we weren't dealing with normal people here, and that at least city block level durability is standard. Now as you already know, this same Buggy who can casually brush off an at least city block level attack is significantly impacted by a casual kick from Luffy. So again, an at least city block level attack potency is also established. Now after Buggy, excluding Captain Kuro, Luffy went on to fight Don Craig, who had a bounty of 17 million berries, followed by Arlong, who had a bounty of 20 million berries. Now Don Craig is a guy who casually walks around with 500 kilograms on each of his shoulders and is able to effortlessly swing this weight when converted to an over metric ton spear. Then we know that Arlong is a fishman, and all fishmen from birth are 10 times stronger than the average human in the One Piece world. Thus Arlong could casually go around doing things like eating a cannonball that was fired at him, or lifting every house in a village and then putting them upside down, or uprooting a house from the ground and then destroying another house with the house that he just uprooted. Even Hachi, another fishman and Arlong's third in command, was casually using 6 swords, each of which were 300 kg in weight, and thus a total of 1.8 ton, and was also easily pushing a giant underwater reef structure. So of course, Arlong, even by just splashing some water in Sanji's face, was enough to heavily injure Sanji and have him on the ground reconsidering life, even going as far as to say that Arlong was like nothing they had ever faced before. And even with Luffy at the start of their fight, Arlong could take a headbutt, then a kick to the abdomen, followed by a Gatling of punches, and it did absolutely no damage to him at all. So needless to say, despite the only 3 million bounty difference between Craig and Arlong, as Yasoku had pointed out before reaching Arlong Park, Arlong is way stronger than Don Craig. But of course, Luffy was eventually able to overcome that hurdle. Now let us move forward to Alabasta, where we met Baroque's work, a criminal organization headed by Crocodile, one of the 7 warlords of the sea. So Baroque Baroque's work is organized such that the strongest members exist in numbered male and female pairs, with the lower the number, the stronger the pair. And note, the strength of each member of a pair are generally comparable to each other, with a few exceptions. Now, as you would guess, Crocodile being the strongest is the opponent Luffy ended up fighting and beating in this arc. But the problem is, no meaningful reference point was established for how durable Crocodile was before meeting Luffy. Thus, no great insight will really be gained from their battle. So to get an idea of where Luffy should be, let us instead start with one of the weaker members of the crew, Usopp. Now, Usopp's opponents were the Mr. 4 pair, who mainly utilized explosive baseballs that he easily strikes to his opponent using a bat that weighs 4 metric tons. Now, these explosives have a versus battle wiki calculation of 157 tons TNT equivalent, making them multi-city block level. Now, we clearly saw where Usopp just straight up takes multiple of these explosions at point blank range and basically just continued to fight as if nothing had happened. And throughout this fight, in addition to tanking the bombs, Usopp got even more punishment, having been slammed through walls at very high speed and then finally receiving a hit from Mr. 4's 4-ton bat directly to the face, and yet he was still able to stand. So we can be sure that an Alabasta arc Usopp has a durability of at least 157 tons TNT equivalent, which is multi-city block level, and all higher tier characters in this arc would not have an attack potency or durability of less than that. Now, the next person in Alabasta to help us scale further is Pell. So Pell was stated to be the strongest fighter in the Alabasta army, and he was shown to survive this explosion that was intended to destroy the capital city of Alaberna. Now, Crocodile specifically mentioned that this bomb was 5 kilometers wide, and the Versus Battle Wiki calculate that it was a small city level bomb, and that Pell's durability for surviving it is 46 kilotons, or town level. Now, this is likely an underestimation for many reasons, but let us just work with it, since right now we're really just establishing perspective. Now, here we have this same Pell casually being folded by Nico Robin. Like, the difference in their level was clearly not even close. And remember, Robin was not even intending to kill him. So even though there are some concerns we could get into about the overall circumstances, I think we can comfortably say that even a casual attack from Alabasta arc Robin has an at least 46 kiloton attack potency. And characters like Zoro and Sanji at the time would at least scale to her level. Then Zoro's opponent was Mr. 1 or Daz Bones, who we know was only second to Crocodile in Baroque's work. And for reference, Crocodile's bounty before he became a warlord is 81 million berries, and Daz Bones' bounty at the time was 75 million berries. And just for a bit of context here, before joining Baroque works, Daz Bones was a famous assassin from the West Blue who even Smoker acknowledged as powerful, and sometime during his time as an assassin, he had gotten even stronger by eating a devil fruit which allows him to turn his body to steel. And remember, Daz Bone had ample time to train his devil fruit, and the more you train a devil fruit, the stronger it gets. So the Daz Bones that was fighting Zoro had never met a swordsman that had even been able to scratch him since he got his devil fruit. Now I know what you're thinking, he may have only just been meeting weak swordsmen, and that is also what Zoro thought. But clearly that wasn't the case, because for the majority of their fight, Zoro himself could not even not damage Daz Bones, but he literally couldn't even scratch him. Now obviously, in typical Zoro fashion, after having a building fall on top of him, then casually picking it up, followed by being shredded on multiple occasions, then lying in a pool of his own blood, followed by being shredded yet again with the pillar behind him being completely diced, and Daz Bones now wondering how this guy is still alive, given that he's probably bled out his entire blood volume. Zoro, in his most injured state since coming to Alabasta, was able to just one-shot Daz Bones. And remember, up to this point, he had not even been able to scratch Daz Bones. So even Daz Bones himself was surprised just by how much Zoro had grew in the short span of their fight. So Zoro at this point would be way stronger than our 47 kiloton or town level baseline. And note, even Nami, one of the weaker Straw Hats, was able to partially block and withstand a blow from Miss Doublefinger, the same blow which he used to casually destroy a pillar. And again, just to emphasize, just because the range of destruction of this technique was small, that does not mean it can only destroy concrete. discreet. Remember, we know that Miss Doublefinger is Mr. One's partner, and the agents in a pair are usually comparable in strength. So at this point, we know for sure that no Straw Hat were below our established minimum of 46 kilotons or town level. Now, after Alabasta, the crew went to Skypeia, and in Skypeia, quite a few things happened. For example, we saw where Enel used Raigo to completely destroy a Sky Island, and even the Versus Battle Wiki accepts that Raigo is at least island level. And we also saw where Luffy was able to completely dispel Raigo and completely clear the sky. However, this Raigo dispelling, sky clearing punch attack potency is a bit controversial. So let us instead turn our eyes to Luffy's golden rifle, the punch that Luffy used to beat Enel. Now again, the Versus Battle calc of this punch has it at least at 17.1 megatons. So we can be comfortable to say that a Skypeia arc Luffy is at least this 17.1 megatons or city level. So with that, let us go to the Water 7 and Enies lobby arcs where we met the CP9. Now one of the good things about the CP9 as it relates to scaling is that their overall physical capabilities are actually quantified and expressed in numbers called Douriki units. Now even though the Douriki is measured with a kick or a punch, Douriki is still a measure of all of a person's physical attributes. So for reference, a regular armed soldier can be thought to have a Douriki of around 10, and anyone who has achieved a Douriki of 500 or above is called a superhuman. Now as you can see, a human form Rob Lucci has a Douriki value of 4000, which is approximately 4.9 times that of Blueno, who has a Douriki of 820, and 5 times that of Fukuro, who has a Douriki of 800. Now again, given that we know that the whole point of Douriki is that it is a measure of the overall physical attributes of an individual, these differences mean that we can say that Rob Lucci is at least 4.9 times stronger and more durable than Blueno, and at least 5 times stronger and more durable than Fukuro. Now, despite the blatantly obvious nature of this, you'll still have some people who insist that despite the fact that Oda canonically gave us and emphasized this numeric measurement of power level, we can't say that Lucci is at least 5 times stronger than Fukuro and Blueno because Oda didn't specifically state if Douriki is linear or non-linear. Now this is obviously just completely silly, but because we don't want to take anything for granted, let us go through this. So firstly, a linear scale means that there's a constant rate of change, and thus on a graph it is represented by a straight line. So as an example, using the graph values that you are seeing, a linear Douriki would mean that for every 1 increase in Douriki value, there's also a 1 point increase in physical attributes. Then a non-linear scale on the other hand is any scale that is not linear, and thus in simple terms, is any scale that does not have a straight line. Now obviously, there are a lot of different types of non-linear scales, but suffice it to say, we can rule out any scale that ever goes downward, because you can't get weaker as your Douriki increases, because remember, your Douriki is the numeric representation of your strength, so they must go in the same direction. So what is left in the non-linear section are two possibilities. Firstly, an exponential scale, which is a scale in which with each increase of Douriki, physical power basically multiplies above its previous value in a predictable manner. So in this example, you'll note that with the first 1 value increase in Douriki, the physical power also goes up by 1 value. And then with the second 1 value increase of Douriki, the physical power goes up by 2 values this time. Then with the third 1 value increase in Douriki, the physical power goes up by 4 values this time. So with exponential, there's always a bigger increase in power with each incremental increase of the Douriki value. Then the second nonlinear possibility is just any random scale that always goes up, but it goes up in a manner that is not predictable. So in the example that I've given you, you'll note that for the first 2 1 value increments of the Douriki, the power goes up by basically 1 value each time. But then in the next 4 1 value increments of Douriki, that is from 3 to 6, the physical power increases by basically less than 1 value with each increment. So in this type of scale, being that what each increase of Douriki means isn't predictable, means we wouldn't be able to make statements based on Douriki differences. Now all the evidence we have suggests that Douriki is exponential or at bare minimum linear. We know this because Nami can fight and beat Khalifa, who has a Douriki of 630, but she herself just straight up states that she's no match for Kumadori, who has a Douriki of just 180 more than Khalifa, at 810. And Chopper, without taking into account monster point, can casually deal heavy damage to Fukuro, who has a Douriki of 800 but is stumped senseless by Kumadori, who we know only has a Douriki of 10 more than Fukuro at 810. And Frankie, who could fight evenly with and eventually beat Fukuro, could not even scratch Rob Lucci, who has a Douriki of 4000. And again, in this interaction, Lucci himself then specifically emphasized the fact that his Douriki is 5 times that of Fukuro. I wonder what Oda is trying to tell us here. And Frankie himself then even goes on to say that Lucci is incomparably stronger than Fukuro. So again, all the evidence we have suggests that the Douriki of the CP9 is exponential or at bare minimum linear. So we can definitely say that Rob Lucci is at least 5 times stronger than Fukuro and at least 4.9 times stronger than Bueno. And again, remember, an exponential scale has an exponentially slower increase in the beginning, which explains why an average soldier is exponentially weaker than someone like Lucci. Thus, with that now understood, in the first fight against Bueno, we see where Luffy was completely outclassed. Not only was Luffy slower than Bueno to the point that he could not even see Bueno's movements, but also when Bueno purposely allowed Luffy's attack to hit him directly in the face, to further demonstrate the power difference, we see where Luffy's attack could not even phase Bueno. Luffy himself was shown to be frustrated by their toughness. So Luffy was undoubtedly weaker than Bueno at this point. But again, for the sake of scaling, let us underestimate Bueno and assume that he and Luffy were on the same level. Thus, as per Douriki scaling, we know that human form Rob Lucci is at least 4.9 times stronger and more durable than Bueno. But again, just to ensure that no one can accuse us of underestimation, let us round down the multiplier from 4.9 times to 4 times. So this puts human form Rob Lucci to at least 68.4 megatons or city level. Now, after Luffy got his Gear second power up and went back for a rematch, Luffy at base was now easily breaking through Bueno's Tekai and casually destroying him. Like even in comparison to before, where Luffy could not trap Bueno at all, base Luffy was now easily seeing all of Bueno's movements. Bueno himself was surprised at Luffy's new physical baseline. Similarly, at base, Luffy was now matching human form Rob Lucci blow for blow. So we know for a fact that a base Luffy was now, like human form Rob Lucci, at least 68.4 megatons or city level. But it doesn't end there, because Lucci then transforms into hybrid Zoan form. And remember, the physical attributes of a Zoan are exponentially increased when they turn into their Zoan form. And as Chopper describes, carnivorous Zoans get an even greater increase than regular Zoans. And also remember, we know that the Douriki scale does not include the additional boost granted by a Devil Fruit. So we know that a hybrid form Rob Lucci is undeniably much stronger and more durable than a human form Rob Lucci. But even with this power up, a Gear 4 Luffy was able to hurt and do significant damage to even this hybrid form Rob Lucci with each punch. Now, even though the manga did not give us a specific scaling factor for this hybrid form Lucci, we know a basic characteristic of a leopard is that it is on average 7 times stronger than an average adult human. So given that Lucci has a leopard Zoan fruit, it stands to reason that we should be able to say that hybrid form grants him an at least 7 times power up. And remember, we know that Oda himself goes above base characteristics and exaggerate the features of Zoans in comparison to their normal animal counterpart. Like for example, Sasaki, who ate the Triceratops model Ancient Zoan Devil Fruit, is able to rotate his Triceratops frills around his neck at high speeds that acts like our helicopter's rotatory wings, allowing him to fly. Now I hope I don't need to tell you this, but real world Triceratops obviously were not able to do that. Similarly, Queen, who ate the Brachiosaurus model Ancient Zoan Devil Fruit, is able to detach his neck, midsection and tail from his torso, leaving the torso behind, thus moving around in a snake-like form. And note, this is not a cybernetic augmentation. It was specifically highlighted that this was his Brachiosaurus power before the move where Queen said he was sticking to the raw, unadulterated power of a dinosaur, and after the move again he specifically emphasized that it was the true form of a Brachiosaurus. Now again, you don't need to be a paleontologist to know that real-world Brachiosaurus were not actually able to do this, and yet again with King, who ate the Pteranodon model Ancient Zoan Devil Fruit, King is able to pull back his head and release it like a laser beam in an attack known as Imperial Deep Pride Stake. And again, King specifically highlights that this is his Pteranodon's power with the line, "This is how the ancients used to hunt." Again, real-world pteranodons were not actually able to do this. And though not a zoan, but still animal-related, in an SPS a fan pointed out to Oda that sharks are widely known to have two penises, and the fan then asked, since this is the case for real-world sharks, is it also the case for the shark Fishman Horde? And Oda, who didn't even know of this prior to this SPS comment, says since real-world sharks have two, then Horde, the shark Fishman, has two as well. So given this context, it seems silly to say that unless it is literally stated word for word by Oda that we can't even use certain facts known about real-world animals to establish certain baselines for zoans who are typically even given exaggerated features which their real-world counterparts do not have. Like, as long as it's consistent with the lore, it seems absurd to just dismiss it. So a Gear 2 Luffy should have an at least 7 times power up, being that he's able to hurt and deal significant damage to hybrid form Rob Lucci. However, even despite the obvious nature of this hybrid Lucci 7 times multiplier, the evidence provided, and it being completely consistent with everything we know about zoans and the lore, some people will persist in saying we can't use this 7 times multiplier for hybrid Lucci because it isn't literally stated in the manga or any official material. So let us put that 7 times multiplier aside and instead turn to the official French version of the official One Piece databook Yellow, in which it literally states that the second gear increases Luffy's speed and strength by 10 times. Now again, this is not a fan-written databook, this is an official One Piece databook, and this is not a mistranslation. I've had multiple native French speakers confirm that it indeed literally says 10 times or tenfold. Now again, despite us upping the standard of evidence and now providing an official source, some people may still try to invalidate this by bringing up the fact that the Japanese version of the databook Yellow doesn't specifically say 10 times. It instead says that the power and speed are extraordinary. But again, this does not contradict what is written in the French version of the databook. It is not like the Japanese version says Gear 2 has a 2-fold multiplier, and then the French version says that it has a 10-fold multiplier. If that were the case, then yeah, we could definitely say that the French version is invalid. However, that is not what's happening here. There's nothing that is mutually exclusive between extraordinary and 10 times. The French version of the databook is merely more specific than the Japanese version. So again, that is not a good reason to say that we can't use this 10 times multiplier from this official source. But how about in the manga? Is there any reason to think that a 10 times multiplier for a Gear 2 would be inconsistent with any plot element that had been established up to that point or at any point at all in the story? Again, there's absolutely no plot element in the entire manga that contradicts or even slightly goes against a 10 times multiplier for a Gear 2. As a matter of fact, the manga actively supports an at least 10 times multiplier, given that, as we already discussed, the context around zoans makes us expect that a hybrid form Lucci would have an at least 7 times multiplier, and as we already pointed out, a Gear 2 Luffy was clearly doing significant damage to him. So in accordance with this official source, for which there is no mistranslation and no actual contradiction with the Japanese version or the manga itself, we will be using the 10 times multiplier for Gear 2. So that puts a Gear 2 Luffy to at least 684 megatons. But again, remember, even though Gear 2 evidently makes Luffy stronger, it wasn't the gear that was developed specifically for power. Gear 2 was actually developed primarily for speed. The gear that Luffy developed with the primary intention of power was instead Gear 3. Like, we know this for a fact because obviously, separate from the size, Gear 3 is the gear that Enies Lobby Luffy specifically emphasized when he needed power above all else. So for example, when he thought that Blueno had survived his 2 Gear 2 punches, Gear 3 is what he was about to use against Blueno, but of course Blueno fell before it could even be used. And again, when Luffy realized that hybrid form Lucci was sturdy enough to stand up to his Gear 2 strikes, Gear 3 is what he brought out to test Rob Lucci's fortitude. And Gear 3 was demonstrated to be so much more powerful than Gear 2 that even after this hybrid form Lucci activated his Tekai, which increases his durability even further, and then also blocked with both hands, the Gear 3 attack still almost knocked this hybrid form Rob Lucci unconscious with a single hit. Like, Rob Lucci made it a specific specific point of duty to avoid being hit by Gear 3 again. And again, because Gear 3 was developed for power above all else, initially, even speed was sacrificed for this power. So we know for a fact that Gear 3 is significantly more powerful than Gear 2. Now again, a specific multiplier for how much stronger Gear 3 is over Gear 2 was not given in the manga. So let us underestimate it to an absurd degree and assume that Gear 3 is only 0.1 times stronger than Gear 2. Like, I'm hoping you appreciate just how much we are underestimating here. So this would give Gear 3 an 11 times multiplier, and a Gear 3 Luffy would be at least 752.4 megatons or mountain level in attack potency. So at the end of Enies lobby, we know that Luffy in his lowest state is at least city level, and at his highest is at least mountain level. Now again, after the Enies lobby arc, Luffy went to Thriller Bark and underwent many battles such as against Zombie Oars, where he shattered its spine with a Gear 3 grip, and he also fought against Gecko Moria. Now interestingly, Gecko Moria actually has a multiplier, specifically the 1000 shadow absorption technique. And remember, we know that a base Moria could easily tank an attack from a base Luffy, being just more annoyed than hurt. Thus his base durability would be at least 684 megatons, and after the 1000 times multiplier, it would increase to at least 684 gigatons, which is large island level. And we saw clearly where Luffy was able to hurt the Shadow Asgard's Moria, and thus we know that Gear 2 Luffy would have an attack potency of at least 684 gigatons or large island level. But some people will argue that we can't use this multiplier for various reasons that isn't really worth arguing about. So we won't be using Gecko Moria to scale. Instead, the reason that we're actually on Thriller Bark is because even though you should have already guessed that it was theoretically possible, on Thriller Bark is actually the first time that we see Luffy use Gear 2 and Gear 3 together in his giant jet shell attack. Now what's good about this is that we already have the multipliers for Gear 2 and Gear 3 individually. So the Gear 2 Gear 3 state does not need to be scaled to anything else. We know that the minimum multiplier value must be at least Gear 2 times Gear 3, which is 110 times. So we know that a Thriller Bark Luffy, even assuming no growth in base strength over the entire arc, his strongest form is still at least 75.24 gigatons or island level. Now after Thriller Bark, Luffy went to Sabaody Archipelago, where his crew disappeared one by one right in front of his eyes, with him being unable to do anything at all. This was then followed by a match with Magellan at Impel Down, where Luffy was utterly destroyed and had to sacrifice 10 years of his life to even get a 2 to 3% chance to continue living. Then immediately following this, there was a large-scale war at Marineford in which his brother Ace died right in his arms, again with Luffy being completely powerless to do anything at all. So needless to say, even after going around defeating warlords and liberating countries and challenging the government head-on, Luffy now realized that he was far too weak to challenge the New World. So under the tutelage of the Dark King Rayleigh, the first mate of the former Pirate King Goldie Roger, Luffy spent 2 full years training to improve his physical abilities and obtain and train Haki. Now upon return from his training, as you would expect, Luffy was on a completely different level. At Sabaody Archipelago, before his training had commenced, it took a Gear 2 Luffy going all out, combined with a Diaobe Jam Sanji and Zoro to barely put down a Pacifista. And you'll note the Pacifista is even still operational after their combined attack. As a matter of fact, the Pacifistas are so durable that even a Cloven Rose Blizzard from Chopper, followed by a flurry of punches from Frankie, then a sword attack from Brook, then followed by multiple explosive attacks from Usopp, then the Pacifista eating its own laser beam as a result of an attack from Robin, followed by a lightning strike from Nami, and then a Diaobe Jam from Sanji, followed by a 9 sword style Demon 9 slashes from Zoro, and then finally a Gear 3 rifle from Luffy. Even after an attack from every single member of the Straw Hat crew and its own attack, the Pacifista is still completely intact. But then, immediately post time skip on Sabaody Archipelago upon Luffy's return, we see where a single Haki-coated Gear 2 punch from Luffy is causing a Pacifista to literally explode. And of course, Sanji and Zoro were now also easily able to destroy a Pacifista, with Zoro easily slashing through it and Sanji easily breaking its neck. So, as you would expect, after 2 full years of training, the Straw Hats had become unimaginably stronger. Now after this, the crew traveled to Fishman Island, where we were introduced to one of the most pertinent scaling factors, the energy steroid. So the energy steroid is a drug that has the effect of doubling the user's overall physical attributes every time they take a single pill in exchange for some of their life force. So to be clear here, what this means is that if you take 1 pill, your power doubles. If you take 2 pills, your power quadruples. If you take 3 pills, your power increases 8-fold, and this continues so forth. So the pills have an exponential effect. And note, you can't just take as many pills as you want to get to any power level, because remember, with each pill that is taken, you are literally trading your life force for that power. So for example, after Horde went on a pill binge, we see where he almost died as his body was being ripped apart and reformed to accommodate the power he was getting. And Hyozu, who also went on a pill binge like Horde, similarly almost died during the transition process. And even if you survive the transition process, the power is still short-lived, because as we saw at the end of the arc, all the life force that Horde and his crew had been sacrificing for power was taken away from them in one fell swoop, and they became old and infirm. So with that now understood, let us begin scaling. So the first person we'll talk about is Wadatsumi, a tiger blowfish man that is confirmed to be 80 meters tall in his base non-inflated state. Now Wadatsumi without the energy steroids was clearly demonstrated to be able to tank a direct Gear 2 punch to the face from Luffy, only sustaining a broken tooth. Now though we don't know how strong a punch from this post time skip Gear 2 Luffy is, we do know that it is definitely way stronger than a punch from a pre-time skip Gear 2 Luffy. So Wadatsumi being able to tank a hit from a post-time skip Gear 2 Luffy means that he would definitely be able to tank a hit from a pre-time skip Gear 2 Luffy, who we know was at least 684 megatons. So right off the bat, we know that Wadatsumi at base, that is without inflation and without any energy steroids, has a durability of at least 684 megatons. And we can also assume that his attack potency should be comparable. So then later in the arc, we saw where Zio gave Wadatsumi a single energy steroid, and this energy steroid took effect immediately, powering up Wadatsumi. So at this point, we know that this one energy steroid powered up Wadatsumi should have a durability and attack potency of double his base, and thus he was now at least 1.368 gigatons, which makes him small island level. But even with this power up, we see where Jinbe was able to casually match Wadatsumi's attacks and was also easily able to hurt him. Similarly, Sanji with a regular kick was also easily able to hurt Wadatsumi, and then Wadatsumi, being that he's a tiger blowfish man, inflated himself to at least twice his normal 80 meters size, which would increase his durability even further. And yet again, Jinbe was easily able to do significant damage to this gigantic form Wadatsumi, and Sanji was also easily able to one-shot Wadatsumi with his Hell Memorous kick, which also set Wadatsumi's entire body on fire during the process. So given this, we know that both Sanji and Jinbe at this point also have an attack potency of at least 1.368 gigatons, which as we said before is small island level. The next relevant person who took some of the energy steroids is Hyozu, the strongest swordsman on Fishman Island and who was the second strongest antagonist in the Fishman arc, and thus he was Zoro's opponent. Now we saw where a base Hyozu and 2 of his companions were each hit by a Gear 2 punch from Luffy, and whereas his companions were completely knocked out, Hyozu was fine after receiving Luffy's Gear 2 punch, and was even able to poison Luffy in the process. And even Luffy himself emphasized Hyozu's strength for being able to take his Gear 2 attack. So again, being that Hyozu without any energy steroids can take a hit from a post-time skip Gear 2 Luffy, we therefore know he would definitely be able to take an attack from a pre-time skip Gear 2 Luffy, and thus his base state durability, like Wadatsumi, is at least 684 megatons. And then later in the arc, before he fought Zoro, we know Hyozu was coughing down energy steroids like they were soybeans and washed them down with his drink. Now obviously, even though a specific number isn't literally stated here, I think common sense should tell any rational person that scoffing down pills like they were soybeans and washing them down with your drink obviously doesn't mean that he just took 3 or 4. Like from this description, he clearly took quite a lot of them. As a matter of fact, Remember, Hyozu was the only other person separate from Horde who took so many pills that he almost died in the transition process to accommodate his power. So I think saying that Hyozu binge ate less than 10 energy steroids would not really make any sense. So after the consumption of these energy steroids, Hyozu would be multiplied by at least 1024 times, giving him a durability and attack potency which should be comparable of at least 700.4 gigatons. But again, Zoro effortlessly put Hyozu down, like he didn't even need to use Haki or even struggle in the slightest. And to make matters worse, he was trash talking Hyozu from literally the start of the fight to its conclusion. Hyozu was by no means anywhere close to Zoro. So again, at this point, we know that Zoro has an attack potency of at least 700.4 gigatons, which, as we mentioned before, is large island level. Then the final person who we'll talk about who took some of the energy steroids is Horde Jones, the main antagonist of the Fishman Island arc. Now we didn't see Luffy interacting with Horde before he took the energy steroids, but we know certain facts. Firstly, a base Horde Jones, that is Horde without any steroids, Usopp straight up tells us that this base Horde is way stronger than Arlong. Now this should have just been obvious to any rational person, given that Arlong was an early pre-time skip antagonist that Luffy would have fought and defeated over 2 years ago before he even got Gear 2 and Gear 3, much less Haki, and 2 full years of training with the first mate of the former Pirate King. But despite the obvious nature of this, I thought I'd still point out this fact because I often come across some very silly comments. Now secondly, we know that even amongst his fellow fishmen, Horde's natural physical attributes is on such a different level that even his fellow fishmen appear visibly scared with him just demonstrating his strength. So obviously a base Horde's durability would not be any less than a base Hyozu or a base Wadatsumi who are able to tank a hit from a post-time skip Gear 2 Luffy. Thus again, we know that a base Horde would definitely be able to tank a hit from a pre-time skip Gear 2 Luffy. Thus his durability and attack potency, which should be comparable, should be at least 684 megatons. Now let us jump close to the end of the Luffy vs Horde fight, where we saw where Horde was chowing down on a handful of these energy steroids. Now there were so many energy steroids in his hand that some were overflowing and dropping out. As a matter of fact, in the panel, we can actually see how many were overflowing and dropping out. It was shown to be 15. So of course, if 15 were overflowing, you'd expect that at least double that would have remained in his palm and went into his mouth. So he should have eaten at least 30 pills here. And it just so happened that the anime actually showed his palm with the pills. And even from just the top layer of pills in his palm, we saw where there were at least 45 pills. So 45 minus 15 confirms at least 30 pills. Thus this would have powered him up to a multi-continental level if multiplied from base. And we then clearly saw where Luffy easily overpowered him with a Haki coated Gear 3 elephant gun. However, I often come across certain concerns such as, did the pills actually have enough time to take effect? And he was severely injured at this point after a long battle with Luffy, so that may have affected things, as well as he had overdosed a little earlier, so there are some concerns about decreased effectiveness due to tolerance. So in response to all of that, let us forget about the end of the battle. Let us instead start with a fresh Horde that pulled up to Ryugu Palace. Now remember, when Horde arrived at Ryugu Palace, it was specifically pointed out that he was not on any drugs at all, and the major fights in the arc had not yet started. So a Ryugu Palace Horde was in a completely fresh and healthy base state. So upon entry on Ryugu Palace, he met Zoro, who proceeded to one-shot him. And that is when he took his first pill and he immediately comes back even stronger, to the point that he's overpowering King Neptune. Then very shortly after this, Horde took his second pill and left to go to Gienkorde Plaza, which we know would take less than an hour to reach. But on the way to Gienkorde Plaza, we know that the wound that Zoro gave Horde was still hurting him, thus he was binge eating energy steroids. Now again, even though a specific number isn't stated, the phrasing obviously implies that he took quite a lot. And I mean, just remember our frame of reference here. We know that Horde is the type of guy who, when he feels pushed, will grab 45 plus pills and just start chowing. And even on a regular day, when he's feeling just fine, he'll casually take 4 pills and it will only give him a slight pump. And note, During this binge eating session, he clearly took way more than he had ever taken before, because he even almost died while his body was transitioning to accommodate the power. And remember, we know he had already taken 2 pills at Ryugu Palace shortly before the binge eating session began. So again, even though a specific number isn't literally stated, given the context, to say that Horde took less than 15 pills in total before reaching Game Corday Plaza would just be silly. And it is undeniable that the pills had their effect, because firstly, as we already stated, he almost died while his body was transitioning to accommodate the power, and then after his body acclimated to this newfound power, there were clear physical changes, like his hair turned white, and his physique got much larger and way more muscular than in his base state. And we see where even a single drop of normal water, when thrown by this post-overdose Horde, is easily destroying multiple mountain-like and gigantic coral reef structures for a nearly unending distance. He himself was surprised by just how much stronger he had become, and he exclaimed that he was feeling incredible. And he also became so fast that even a mermaid, the fastest creature in the sea, could not outrun him, and even Luffy would go on to praise his durability on multiple occasions. So again, Corday Plaza Horde would have reasonably taken at least 15 pills. We know for a fact that the pills had their effect, and he was undeniably at peak condition. So at this point, we know that Horde would have a durability and attack potency which should be comparable of 22.41 teratons, which puts him at country level. But even with this power up, here we have Luffy casually beating him down, not only with a Gear 2 attack and an Armament Haki coated base attack, but also even using a base attack with no Haki at all. And of course, Luffy easily overpowers an attack from this overdosed Horde. And again, even in the water, where we know a Fishman has the advantage, because firstly, a Fishman's physical attributes double underwater, secondly, a normal human's attacks usually halves underwater, and thirdly, a Devil Fruit user like Luffy has a weakness to the sea that further drastically weakens their attack when it is submerged in water. But yet again, here we have Luffy whose attacks are weakened by the sea, significantly hurting this at least continental plus underwater buffed Horde, not only with a Red Hawk or a Haki coated base attack, but also even a base attack with no Haki at all. So given this, we know that a base Luffy's attack potency at this point is undeniably at least 22.41 teratons, which as we mentioned before is country level, and his Gear 2 and Gear 3 attacks are now large country level at 224 and 246 teratons respectively, and our Gear 2 Gear 3 state is 2.46 petatons, which is continental level. And remember, all of these values are without Haki, so basic armament Haki can be added to any level to make it significantly stronger. So after Fishman Island, Luffy and the crew went to Punk Hazard. Now there's really only one thing on Punk Hazard that I want to go over with you, and that is the interaction where Law easily sliced through a fully armament Haki coated Virgo and all the mountains within the vicinity in a single slash. Now again, because a lot of people think bigger area of effect means stronger, they think the main feat that happened here are the mountains being cut. However, remember, there are 2 feats that actually happened in this interaction. The first feat was Law being able to slice cleanly through Virgo's armament Haki coated body, and the second feat was the mountains being cut. Now of these 2 feats, the actually more impressive one was Law being able to cut through Virgo's armament Haki coated body, because we know that Virgo has a durability way above mountain level. Remember, a casual kick from a Fishman Island Sanji was at least small island level, and we see where even with receiving a Dialbe Jam without using armament Haki at all, Virgo just took it and got up as if nothing had happened. And from that interaction, Sanji describes him as being like a mass of iron. As a matter of fact, we even see where in a clash between Sanji and Virgo, who was not using armament Haki, the clash resulted in one of Sanji's leg bones being literally broken. Like, there is no question that even a base Virgo without armament Haki has a durability of way above the 1.368 gigatons or small island level at least value that we already established from Fishman Island. But then remember, against Law, Virgo further increased his durability through coating his body with armament Haki, and we know that Virgo's armament Armament Haki is especially powerful because, as we saw, he can use it to make a completely ordinary bamboo stick more durable than Smoker's sea stone tipped iron jite, which Smoker had made even more durable by coating it in his own Armament Haki. And even though Flamingo himself acknowledged that Virgo's Haki was very powerful, saying that Law would have trouble cutting through it. So we know that an Armament Haki coated Virgo is way above mountain level. Thus make no mistake, the more important feat in this interaction was not the flashy big area of effect multiple mountains being cut, but rather it was the less flashy but way more potent feat of Law being able to cut through Virgo's Haki coated body. So then, after Punk Hazard, we go to Dressrosa where we meet the heavenly demon, Don Quixote Doflamingo. But before we speak about Doflamingo, we need to speak briefly about Don Chinjao. Now for those of you who are not aware, Don Chinjao was both stated and shown to split an ice continent. And this ice continent was shown to be made of an ice that was so hard that literal steel axes and flamethrowers from multiple men are not only not able to damage it, but they literally can't even scratch it. And in the anime, we even get the added context of Chinjao saying that it couldn't be scratched by them even if they tried for 100 years. Because as he pointed out, the only way to even hope of breaking this ice is to strike it in a single point with a blow of tremendous force. So obviously, this ice was in no way comparable to normal ice or even normal land, and splitting this ice continent would thus require an unimaginable greater force than what would be required to split a regular continent. And even though the current Colosseum Chinjao that fought Luffy was no longer strong enough to carry out this ice continent splitting feat, before the end of the Dressrosa arc, Chinjao's grandson Don Sai broke Chinjao's recently fixed head, and it was confirmed to us by Chinjao himself that Sai was now strong enough to split the ice continent. And by the way, yes, the original Japanese does describe the Jewel Ice Sheet as a continent. So with this bit of lore, all characters that are higher in level than this mid-level character Sai, like End of Dressrosa Art Luffy and Doflamingo, was thus confirmed to be easily at least continental in attack potency and durability. However, it seems as if you can't ever bring up these facts without someone accusing you of, quote, wanking the Don Chinjao's ice continent splitting feat, or attempting to downplay it by saying things like, oh, we don't actually know if he split the whole thing, when we know it wouldn't make any sense for Oda to emphasize Chinjao splitting a continent if he didn't split the whole thing, or saying even if he actually split the whole continent we don't know the continent's size, when in the One Piece world we have even a regular country such as Alabasta having a 50-kilometer wide river that barely takes up any space on its map. Some people will even go to absurdity and suggest that the feat is only mountain level in attack potency, or even worse, city level in attack potency. Now, the downplaying of this feat is obviously silly, however, it comes up quite often, so let us take a second to go through this logically. So firstly, we know for a fact that this Colosseum Don Chinjao is way weaker than he was in his prime. As a matter of fact, he even specifically mentions that the him right now cannot do an attack that is strong enough to split the ice continent. So even though we don't know the specific attack potency that is required to split the ice continent, we do know for a fact, however, that whatever that attack potency is, it must be way stronger than the attack potency of any feat that a Colosseum Chinjao carries out. So right off the bat, we see where Colosseum Chinjao is currently strong enough to clash equally with an Armament Haki coated base attack from Colosseum Luffy. And remember, we know this feat is way weaker than the ice continent splitting feat. So with this information, you can just apply 700 plus chapters of context to properly contextualize the ice continent splitting feat and dispel some nonsense. So firstly, even an attack from a pre-time skip year 2 Enies Lobby arc Luffy, which is way weaker than an attack from a Colosseum Luffy, is still at least 684 megatons or high mountain level. So saying that the attack potency of the ice continent splitting feat is this range or below it literally makes no sense. And I mean, if you even just read the flashback, you'll see that smashing 8 mountains with his bare fist was a warm-up exercise for Garp before fighting Don Chinjao. So even though the ice continent splitting feat wasn't the max of what a Prime Chinjao could do. It was still obviously at least above mountain level, which is clearly depicted as just warm-up range for the old generation. Then remember, we know that even a base no Haki attack from a Fishman arc Luffy, even while submerged in water, is still at least 22.4 teratons or country level. Thus we know that the Ice Continent splitting attack must require an attack potency of way above country level, given that it is way above the Colosseum Clash, which in turn is way above the Fishman arc underwater Luffy base attack. So to downplay the attack potency required to split the Ice Continent evidently makes no sense, and by all metrics it is likely at least continental. However, since we don't have any specific values, I'll just ignore that upgrade and continue to use our Fishman arc values for the rest of the Dressrosa discussion. Now Doflamingo was the main opponent of the Dressrosa arc, and he was undeniably the strongest opponent that Luffy had ever faced so far. Way before this arc even began, pre-time skip at the Marineford War, we saw where using his Parasite String he was easily able to completely immobilize powerful characters like Diamond Jozu, who was the 3rd Division commander of the Whitebeard Pirates. And of course, in keeping with this, in Dressrosa, we saw where he was able to do the same thing to Sanji, even mid-attack while Sanji's flames were still on. We even see where Sanji's kicks, which remember were at least small island level from Fishman Island, does 0 damage to Doflamingo even without him using Armament Haki. We also clearly saw where Law, who we know could easily slice through the way above small island level Armament Haki coated Virgo, as well as meteors summoned by Fujitora. This same Law could not cut through Doflamingo's regular strings. Then even when faced with a Gear 2 Haki coated attack from Luffy, which we know at this point even without the Armament Haki is at least 224 teratons or large country level, Doflamingo literally just laughs at the attack and tells Luffy though it may be fast, it is still basically too weak to do any real damage to him. And even the stronger Gear 3 Haki coated Elephant Gun was easily stopped by Doflamingo's spider web. So in response to this absolutely overwhelming foe, Luffy introduced us to his strongest form, Gear 4 Boundman. Now Gear 4 Boundman is stated to increase his power several times above his limit. Now I made sure to confirm the Japanese version of this panel with multiple native Japanese speakers, and many times or manyfold are also used. So either way, several times, many times, and manyfold all mean at least 3 times. Thus we know that the Gear 4 multiplier is at least 3 times Luffy's limit. So the question that should now obviously come to your mind is, well, what was Luffy's limit? Now I mean, at an intuitive level the answer should be pretty simple to you. Obviously Luffy's limit would be his Gear 2 Gear 3 combination state, which remember we saw pre-time skip against Gekko Moria. However, separate from an intuitive level, how can we be sure that the Gear 2 Gear 3 state must be the limit? Well remember, we know that a regular Gear 3 attack is way stronger than a regular Gear 2 attack, and then basic Armament Haki can be added to a regular Gear 3 attack to make it drastically more powerful. Now, I did not include a basic Armament Haki multiplier in this video because I want to avoid as many pointless debates as possible, but to give you an idea of just how much basic Armament Haki increases the power of an attack, we can turn to Margaret, a side character from Amazon Lily. So we saw where when a completely normal arrow is coated in Armament Haki from a side character like Margaret, it is strong enough to completely shatter rocks and the ground beneath it. And this is casual Haki usage from a side character. At higher levels we even see where Virgo can make his regular bamboo stick more powerful than Smoker's sea stone tipped Iron Jitte that was made even more powerful by Smoker by coating it in his own Armament Haki. So a Gear 3 Haki coated attack is way stronger than a regular Gear 3 attack. Yet we see where in this fight against Doflamingo, a Haki coated Gear 3 Elephant Gun could not do any damage to a thin, single-layered, multiple opening spiderweb that is made of regular strings. But a Gear 4 Headbutt easily breaks through this thick, double-layered, no-opening string shield made of awakened strings. And as another demonstration, yet again in the Cracker fight that occurs after Dressrosa, we see where a Gear 3 Haki coated punch does absolutely no damage to Cracker's Cracker Warrior's shield, whereas a regular Gear 4 punch easily breaks through the shield and the Cracker Warrior itself. So obviously, the limit could not just be Gear 3, given that the way stronger Gear 3 with basic Armament Haki is still in no no way comparable to Gear 4. And I mean again, if Gear 3 were the limit, then the multiplier for Gear 4 would be 33 times. And that would mean a regular Gear 2 Gear 3 combo with no Haki at all is stronger than Gear 4, being that we know for a fact its multiplier is at least 110. Again, that makes no sense. Gear 2 Gear 3 combo state cannot be stronger than Gear 4. So we know for a fact that the only limit that makes sense is the Gear 2 with Gear 3 combo state. And being that Gear 4 is 3 times this limit, we know that Gear 4 is 3 times Gear 2 Gear 3 or 330 times base. But note, that is still only the multiplier for a base Gear 4 attack, because remember, just as how a base Luffy can throw a regular punch or inflate it to make it a Gear 3 punch, a Gear 4 Luffy can also do the same. So a regular Gear 4 punch, for example, is a Kongon, and then Luffy can inflate the Kongon to its Gear 3 version, which is called the King Kongon. So given that the King Kongon is literally just the Gear 3 version of the Kongon, the same Gear 3 multiplier which we already had obviously applies. So Luffy's strongest Gear 4 attack, King Kongon, is at least 11 times his base Gear 4 attack, Kongon, which is 3630 times base Luffy. We know that a base Gear 4 Luffy is at this point at least 7.39 petatons, and the strongest Gear 4 Luffy is at least 81.3 petatons, and thus using this King Kongon, Doflamingo was defeated and a portion of Dressrosa wrecked. Now after Dressrosa, Luffy went to Whole Cake Island, where his next opponent was Charlotte Cracker, one of the 3 sweet commanders of Big Mom and Emperor of the Sea, and a man with a bounty of 860 million berries. Now note, once you reach 300 million, it is very difficult for your bounty to increase any further. And for reference, Doflamingo's frozen bounty was 340 million berries, and Jinbe, who was a former warlord of the sea like Doflamingo, his bounty after the Whole Cake Island arc when he met up with Luffy in Wano was 438 million berries. Then the bounty that Luffy got after he beat Doflamingo was only 500 million berries. And there was actually a 4th sweet commander of Big Mom's crew called Charlotte Snack, who was removed after he was defeated by Uruj. But even so, this weakest former sweet commander of Big Mom's crew had a bounty of 600 million berries. And again, knowing that Luffy defeated Doflamingo, Cracker was the one who Big Mom sent to deal with him. So make no mistake, we definitely know that Cracker was not inferior to Doflamingo, and this was demonstrated immediately as the fight started, because as we already pointed out, even a Haki coated Gear 3 elephant gun, which we knew at this point was at least large country level, was easily overpowered by Cracker's Cracker Warrior. And as Luffy continued to attack with his Gear 2 Armament Haki coated Hawk Gatling, Luffy himself pointed out just how powerful Cracker's Armament Haki is, and thus in the face of this overwhelming foe, Luffy was basically immediately forced into Gear 4 at the start of their fight, and the real Cracker was able to casually slide through Luffy's Gear 4 Armament Haki coated arm, and you'll note that even Doflamingo had a hard time hurting Luffy's Gear 4 form, and Luffy was engaged in this match with Cracker for over 11 hours, and as we know from Rayleigh, Haki routinely increases through battle. So again, we know that Luffy's Haki and his physical strength would have drastically increased during this fight, but since we don't have a specific scaling factor, we'll just ignore this growth. Then, after successfully beating Cracker, Luffy's next opponent was yet another sweet commander, Charlotte Katakuri. Now note, Katakuri is the strongest of the sweet commanders of Big Mom's crew, and he's a man with a bounty of 1.057 billion berries. And remember, the current weakest sweet commander Cracker had a bounty of 860 million, and the second strongest sweet commander Charlotte Smoothie had a bounty of 932 million. And we know that you're generally considered to be a monster if you have a bounty of 1 billion or above. So there was no doubt that Luffy was yet again fighting the strongest opponent that he had ever faced. And at the beginning of their fight, it was made painfully clear to us just how significant the gap in their level was. Like whether it was an Armament Haki coated Gear 2 Hawk Gatling, Katakuri was easily matching Luffy, and then casually beating Luffy down with his own Multi-Mochi arm equivalent. Or if it was an Armament Haki coated Gear 3 Elephant Gun, Katakuri was easily making a bigger version of Luffy's attack and then casually overpowering him. Or even if it was Gear 4 Boundman Luffy, Katakuri is just straight up beating him down. And remember, that is something that even Doflamingo just cannot do. Doflamingo's Armament Haki physical physical attacks just bounce off Gear 4 Luffy without any damage at all. In this fight against Katakuri, we even saw the first ever occasion where not only Luffy's attack, but his armament Haki itself was literally overpowered. Because as Katakuri described, there are levels to armament Haki, and his was significantly stronger than Luffy's. So in this Katakuri fight, we know that Luffy not only learned Future Sight, but he also got a drastic power up in terms of physical strength and Haki, because separate from the fact that, as already highlighted, Haki improves in battle, Katakuri himself eventually accepted Luffy as being on his level, and Luffy then eventually ended up being the victor of their over 9 hours long fight. But again, because we don't have a specific scaling factor, we'll just yet again ignore the growth in strength from this Luffy versus Katakuri fight. So now, this at least Katakuri level Luffy goes to Wano to try to challenge Kaido, but it was shown to us that all of Luffy's attacks, even in his strongest form Gear 4, could do absolutely no damage to even a base form Kaido. And again, the strongest Gear 4 form Luffy, who we know learned Future Sight from the Katakuri fight, and who was clearly shown to be completely on guard, even looking directly into Kaido's eyes, so there was no doubt as to whether he was focused on Kaido or not. This Luffy could not even react to an attack from a human form Kaido, and was completely knocked out in one shot. So Luffy at this point was just completely and utterly outmatched in every single aspect. But I mean, this should have already been obvious to you before the match even began, because even though Luffy had managed to defeat Katakuri, the 1.057 billion berry man, Kaido has men serving under him like Queen and King, who have even higher bounties than Katakuri. And as Shinjao pointed out at Dressrosa, the admirals and emperors themselves are on a completely different level. So an admiral or emperor casually dispatching an emperor first or second commander level opponent like Luffy is a trivially expected feat. We see for example where Big Mom, another emperor of the sea, even while her memory was gone and just using her raw physical strength, that means no Haki and no special powers, was able to completely knock out Queen, Kaido's 1.32 billion berry second commander, in just 2 hits. And the Green Bull, the latest admiral, is able to casually defeat both King and Queen at the same time with just one hand. And the Green Bull himself even emphasizes that at the level of an admiral, if a few commanders were to give him trouble, that would tarnish the reputation of admiral level. So of course, there was still an almost insurmountable gap between an emperor's first commander level Luffy versus an actual emperor like Kaido himself. So after this interaction, Luffy goes to prison to do a little soul searching, and he then learns his first of his 4 Wano power-ups, Advanced Armament Haki Internal Destruction. Now as the name suggests, this is a durability bypassing technique that bypasses a person's external durability and destroys them from the inside. Now remember, we know for a fact that before this internal destruction power-up, Luffy even in his strongest form was completely incapable of damaging even a human form Kaido. But with this Advanced Armament Haki power-up, Luffy was now clearly shown to be able to damage this human form Kaido. And Luffy now being able to damage Kaido was a watershed moment for Luffy that was emphasized not only by Kaido himself, but also by every combatant on Onigashima's rooftop. So with this, we have a full reset where we know even a base advanced armament attack from Luffy is stronger than our prior strongest Gear 4 basic advanced armament Haki King Kong gun from Luffy. And note, even though Luffy used Red Rock, which was a Gear 3 Advanced Armament Haki attack, we can be sure that it is a full reset to a base Advanced Armament Haki attack, because Luffy was not only able to now damage human form Kaido, but rather we also saw where a hybrid form Kaido also decided to dodge Luffy's Red Hawk or possibly a Red Rock, because as Luffy said, it would hurt. And hybrid form is Kaido's strongest form and is thus exponentially stronger and way more durable than a human form Kaido. So through this interaction, we know for sure that a base advanced armament Haki attack would be able to hurt a human form Kaido, which is a full reset. So given the full reset, we know that Luffy's new base is at least his previous highest value, which was 81.3 petatons, and to ensure there can be no claims of overestimation, we will not be employing any multipliers above this previous highest value. We'll instead just be using this previous highest value itself, which we know cannot hurt Kaido, and is actually weaker than our new base value as our new base value. So our new based advanced armament Haki Luffy is now 81.3 petatons, which is multi-continental level, and our new strongest Luffy is now 295 exatons, which is moon level. But it doesn't stop there, because even though Luffy was now able to pass the first hurdle of being able to hurt Kaido with a punch, Kaido was still casually tanking higher level Gear 4 armament Haki internal destruction attacks. Even Kid highlighted that it seemed as if their attacks weren't doing anything at all, so Luffy was still not anywhere close to Kaido and thus was yet again utterly destroyed. But after this knockout, Luffy now realizes that he can coat his attacks with Conquerors Haki. Now Conquerors Haki is a stronger form of Haki that only one in every few million persons are born with, and out of those few persons that are born with Conquerors Haki and who eventually learn to use its incapacitation function, only a select few persons at the absolute top of this group ever become able to coat their techniques with this Conquerors Haki. So compared to before, where even a Gear 4 armament Haki internal destruction Luffy could not really do much discernible damage to Kaido, a base Crude Conquerors Haki internal destruction Luffy is visibly shown to be way stronger than our prior advanced armament Haki Gear 4 Luffy, now doing significant damage to Kaido in his hybrid form, which remember is Kaido's strongest and most durable state. And again, now for the first time ever, Luffy was shown to be strong enough to clash with a hybrid form Kaido. And keep in mind that prior to this, not even a Gear 4 Luffy, much less a base Luffy as you're seeing here, was ever shown to be strong enough to clash with even a human form Kaido, much less a hybrid form Kaido. And again, there is even dialogue confirmation where Luffy himself described all his prior advanced armament Haki internal destruction attacks as being too weak compared to the Crude Conquerors Infusion, which he then learned to do. So by all metrics, this yet again is another reset where a base Crude Conquerors attack is way stronger than even our previous strongest Gear 4 advanced armament Haki Luffy. And again, to ensure there can be no claims of overestimation, for our new base value, we will not be employing any multipliers above the previously highest value, which we know is 295 exatons. We'll instead just be using this previous highest value itself, which we know is weaker than our new base, as our new base. So our new base Crude Conquerors Infused Luffy is now 295 exatons, which is multi-continental level. Our Gear 2 to Gear 2 to 3 combo Luffy range from 2 to 32 zetatons, which is in the small planet range. And our Gear 4 Luffy is in the planet level range, being at least 97 zetatons and going up to 1 yotaton. But you'll note that I call that new power up a Crude Conquerors Infusion, and that is because, as Kaido described, having just acquired this new powerful skill, Luffy's usage was still clumsy and unrefined. Like, think about it. How could Luffy, who literally just learned Conquerors Infusion, possibly compare to a monster like Kaido, who has been refining his Conquerors Haki against the strongest in the One Piece world for over 20 years? So even with this Crude Conquerors Haki internal destruction, Luffy was yet again destroyed. But just as with his 3 prior losses, Luffy, after having narrowly escaped death, comes back with an even more refined and powerful usage of Conquerors Infusion. We see this when a clash between an attack from a hybrid form Kaido and a base Conquerors punch from Luffy is now splitting the heavens. Now, the splitting of the heavens is very significant because it is the symbolic feat that Oda has always used to emphasize that an individual is at least at an Emperor's power level. Thus, as a result, we've only seen this 3 other times amongst the clashes of the strongest of the One Piece verse. These clashes were the clash between Shanks and Whitebeard, then Big Mom and Kaido, and finally Roger versus Prime Whitebeard. So Luffy now being able to split the sky, the symbolic feat which we know he has never been shown to achieve before in any of his forms, even with Crude Conquerors Infusion. The splitting of the sky thus undeniably signifies another reset, where a base Emperor's Conquerors Infusion Luffy is now stronger than his prior strongest Gear 4 Crude Conquerors Infusion form. And again, to ensure that there can be no claims of overestimation, for our new base value, we will not be employing any multipliers above the previously highest value, which was 1.07 yotatons. We'll instead just be using this previous highest value itself, which we know is actually weaker than our new base, as our new base. So our new base Emperor's Conquerors Infused Luffy is now at least 1.07 yotatons, which is planet level. And from Gear 2 to our strongest strongest Gear 4 Luffy, the power ranges from 10 yotatons to 3 ninotons, which is all within the large planet level range. And be sure, Luffy's growth did not stop there, because Kaido, after seeing that Luffy is now finally at an acceptable level, so he can actually start taking the fight seriously, which he exclaims that he has not gotten the chance to do for a very long time, Kaido went into his Shuren Haki or drunken state, which makes him exponentially stronger. And note, during this matchup against this drunken hybrid form Emperor level acting Kaido, as Luffy pointed out, Kaido's Haki was continuously increasing, and we see where Luffy was shown to be matching this Shuren Haki hybrid form Kaido's Gunjoy Meteor Shower with his own Gear 2 Gear 3 combined Rock Gatling, and he was again clearly hurting this Shuren Haki hybrid form Kaido, whose Haki was continuously going stronger, with yet again another Gear 2 Gear 3 combined Giant Hawk Stamp, and thus we know for a fact that Luffy was continuously getting stronger even above the values that I cited. But still, even with this Emperor's Conquerors Haki internal destruction, Kaido was still tanking even the strongest Gear 4 Luffy attack, which with this Emperor's Conquerors Haki infusion is now called Over Kongon. And after Kaido was finally getting excited, there was an unfortunate interruption which led Luffy to be defeated yet again, making it his third loss since being on the rooftop, and a total of 4 losses since coming to Wano to fight against Kaido. But note, this loss was a little special, because in comparison to all the previous losses where Luffy was just knocked out, this time Luffy actually died. Like remember, Kaido is a war veteran who has been fighting in wars and was described as the ultimate soldier from the young age of 10 years old, so he should know when someone has died. And Luffy didn't drop off Onigashima as he did with a prior loss. This time, the defeated Luffy was right there in front of him, and Kaido himself confirmed to us that Luffy was dead, so there should have been no more power-ups, and Luffy should have taken his place beside Ace and Whitebeard. But somehow, Luffy's Devil Fruit awakened, and it was somehow able to revive him from the dead, allowing us to see Luffy's peak form, Gear 5. But exactly how strong is this Gear 5 Luffy? Well, as Luffy himself said, Gear 5 is his strongest form, and as the Gurusai pointed out, Gear 5 has an intrinsic strength multiplier, which makes Luffy stronger than all his previous forms. So remember, the strongest Luffy prior to Gear 5 is an Emperor's Conquerors infused Over Kongon Gear 4 Luffy, which really only served to get Kaido excited. But we see where a base Gear 5 is clearly stronger than the Over Kongon Luffy, being that it is demonstrated to be so strong that he's able to casually lift, spin, and slam Dragon Form Kaido, and even, albeit comically, leaving Kaido with stars above his head. Then we know the multiplier increases even further with the full giant form of Gear 5, which is undoubtedly way bigger than anything Luffy has ever done before, being comparable in size to Dragon Form Kaido, and which is strong enough to be able to casually use this Dragon Form Kaido as a skipping rope. Then the multiplier exponentially increases yet again to the currently highest level, where we have Bajrangon, which is basically a mega giant Luffy level, where Luffy's fist is comparable not only to Dragon Form Kaido, but to the entire island of Onigashima itself. So the lowest intrinsic Gear 5 power multiplier places Gear 5 Luffy above our previously strongest Gear 4 Over Kongon Luffy. Then there are at least 2 exponentially higher levels above that. But remember, as the Gurusai pointed out, Gear 5 not only increases strength, it also increases freedom. And what that means for Luffy's attack potency is a Gear 5 stretch hacks, where Luffy makes his opponent's body behave like rubber, stretching them with each hit. So this is a direct durability alteration technique that can be added to each level of Gear 5 to make it even stronger. And remember, in Gear 5, Luffy is using Emperor's Conquerors Haki internal destruction and Advanced Armament Haki internal destruction concurrently with this stretch hacks, so that his 3 durability bypassing techniques stacked onto each other. And remember, with the Gear 5 stretch hacks, he can even reflect an opponent's projectile or energy based attack right back at them, so an opponent can be done in by their own attack. So with this, I'm hoping it is now clear that silly arguments such as saying Gear 5 Luffy is only island level because his fist is only as big as an island is just silly, and almost any random pixel scale calculation which relies on environmental destruction or area of effect of the punch will inevitably be downplaying Gear 5 Luffy. There is a rich history spanning over 1050 chapters that must be taken into account when scaling a Gear 5 Luffy. Now remember, at the beginning of this video, I told you that above all else, the hierarchical understanding of Luffy's powers and progression is what is important, because with it you can easily understand how absurd certain arguments are which attempt to downplay Luffy. And to demonstrate this, let us go through a what if scenario. So let us assume that in Dressrosa and onwards, Luffy never got a Gear 4. So the highest value for each Wano reset would be the Gear 2, Gear 3 state. So even with this beyond absurd level underestimation, stacked onto all our other underestimations, we still see where at Wano Reset 1 Advanced Armament Haki, Luffy would be completely in the Multi-Continental level. Then at Wano Reset 2 Crude Conquerors Infusion, Luffy would range from Multi-Continental to Moon level. Then at Wano Reset 3 Emperor's Conquerors Infusion, Luffy would go up to Small Planet level at his highest. And remember, this is all before Gear 5. So a thorough understanding of Luffy shows us that his strength is undeniable. Now before we close off the video, let us just quickly review Luffy's speed. Now note, I already made a video where I discussed the speed of the One Piece verse in detail and responded to some of the more silly points which often comes up when we have these discussions, so you can check that out. But as a short summary, pre-time skip Captain Kidd, Zoro, and Luffy who didn't have observation haki were dodging lightspeed beams. Then, after 2 years of training with Rayleigh to get stronger, faster, and unlock basic haki, an immediate post-time skip Luffy is not only casually dodging these light beams, but he's also calling them too slow. Luffy then goes through over 300 chapters of sequential periods of growth where he fought characters like Doflamingo who can casually blitz him in his base state and keep up with his much faster Gear 4 Boundman state, and opponents like Katakuri who's not only blitzing him in his base state but also his Gear 4 Boundman state and even his faster Gear 4 Snakeman state, even after Luffy had learned advanced observation haki. Then, even after all of this growth, Luffy in his Gear 4 state and who could literally see into the future, can't even react to an attack from base state Kaido and is knocked out in one shot. So obviously we have even more growth where Luffy gets to the point that even though he isn't able to fully dodge, he's now able in his base state to react to Kaido's attack. Even Kaido compliments him on his growth. And after many more power-ups, we now see where even a base state Luffy is able to completely perceive and effortlessly dodge this same attack, but not simply from a base state Kaido, but rather from the exponentially faster drunken hybrid form Kaido. And again, Luffy, while in Gear 2 Gear 3 state, is also matching this drunken hybrid form Kaido blow for blow, and in his Gear 4 Snakeman state, he's even able to blitz this drunken hybrid form Kaido. And again, for likely the best perspective you could get about a Wano Luffy's speed, we can turn to Chopper, because in Wano, even Chopper, who we know does not have observation haki, and even while in a visibly weakened and clearly fatigued state, as well as being severely injured and bleeding, even in this state, Chopper was shown to be able to dodge the lightspeed laser beam fired from Queen at basically point blank range. So as you would imagine, Luffy and Kaido are way above lightspeed as it relates to reaction time, combat attack speed, and combat movement speed. And remember, for the majority of their match, Kaido didn't even use Future Sight. And when he did, while in his dragon form, which would make him an even bigger target, he was able to completely avoid all of Gear 4 Snakeman Luffy's attacks and then blitz Luffy before he could even respond. So as the match progressed, even with all the growth I had already stated, Luffy would still need to be growing faster to match this Kaido that is using Future Sight. And remember, all of that was still before Luffy's Gear 5 power up that would have obviously made him even faster. Now, there's currently no way to quantify how much Gear 5 increased Luffy's speed, but I at least want to highlight that that he was casually running on the sky, leaving behind a trail of flames, and also casually catching lightning bolts and even swinging on them. Though these aren't feats we'll use for scaling because Luffy's way above light speed, I still wanted to mention them because they're still pretty fun. But anyway, that's a video guys, and this was a pretty long one, but I wanted to make it as comprehensive as possible, and even so there's still a lot of things that I just could not go over, or else I probably would never have finished. But let me know what you thought of the video in the comment section down below, and don't forget to leave a like if you enjoyed the video. Anyway, for now, see you guys next time.